Good morning, everybody. Happy hump day. Nearly there. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Northeast reporter, Jeremy Armstrong. Morning, Jez.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine, thank you very much. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions, take part in the show. Those of you listening later on podcast, I'm afraid, will just have to wait until you're too old to care anymore. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the Commons vote last night, which introduced a lifetime smoking ban for today's youngsters and split the Tories right down the middle. Yes, again. Now, more on that in a bit, but first, I want to go to a different type of pollution on page 20, where our colleague Nada Faroud, who's pictured holding up a Tesco bag for life that wound up in Turkey. And she's reporting on a new survey about our plastic use. Jeremy, can you take us through this? What does Nada have to tell us?
Yeah, it's extraordinary research, actually, which shows that about 1.7 billion pieces of plastic are thrown away on a weekly basis, equating to 90 billion pieces of packaging in the UK every year. And the problem one has is that there is a risk of stating the obvious. There's no way to put it all. So it ends up into places like Turkey and Bangladesh, the Indian Ocean. They now calculate that around about 150 million tons of plastic will be in the oceans of the world by 2025, which is tripling the amount since 2015. And it's much of it is single use. That's the problem. And if you see the pictures from Turkey, if you see the pictures from Bangladesh, many of those have emanated from the West, and it's because they just shift the problem around the world rather than actually tackling it at source, I suppose.
Yeah, it's astonishing. That's like 1,200 odd pieces of plastic every year for every single man, woman, and child in the country. Unless my maths is completely off, and when you get a lot of zeros, it does go a bit off. Which is why my expenses claims in the office were always so dramatic and interesting. Morning, Susan. So it's a lot. It's a lot. 1,200 pieces a year. It's 4 or 5 bits every day, which is probably about right, isn't it? It's kind of when you start going to the shops and finding out things you have to unwrap and everything else. And most of us have plastic recycling bins. They think we're doing our bit by separating it out from other waste. We see the recycling bin lorries that are different from the other sort coming down the road on different weeks to collect just the recycling. And we generally, probably all think it's going to be reused in some way. And, we're, hooray, saving the planet. But that's not what NADA's saying here either, is it?
No, it's not. And I think it's probably what one would expect when you talk about the numbers. It's just because the numbers are so great that actually there's not the capacity to recycle it in essence, and you end up selling it, you end up dumping it, you end up getting rid of it in means that you shouldn't. And that goes for every individual. And it's sad in the sense that the research suggests that all this recycling that we do, ultimately, there isn't a space to actually reuse it, which is what one wants in this context. Yeah.
So, we're living in a time when we're encouraged to recycle more than ever before. We all know more about recycling and it's got massive widespread public support, but it's still not happening. So what tends to happen, I'm afraid, dear viewer, with the recycling that you shove in your bins and it gets collected once a fortnight, is that it's often incinerated. And that often happens near poorer communities and near people of colour, according to Greenpeace. And it is worse for producing CO2 than actually burning coal, right? That's that bad. And if you're not incinerating it, what Britain tends to do is it bundles it all up and sells it off to another country and lets it rot over there instead. Which is it's just astonishing that this is, we know about this. Nada's reported it plenty of times, hasn't she, Jeremy? But it seems to still keep happening. And what do you think, everyone? Are you aware of where your recycling goes? Do you think there's any point to it? Do you think we're doing well enough? Who's responsible for all this plastic that we have to deal with? As far as Greenpeace is concerned, the problem is, we're not recycling properly. But also, Greenpeace says, Jeremy, that despite all the moves we've seen talking about more sustainable packaging and so on, the problem's only going to get worse because plastic production is set to triple by 2050. How is that so? When we've got companies saying, oh, we're taking plastic out of tea bags and plastic out of this and plastic out of the other, how come production's going to triple? It's
I
just
think
isn't it?
if you look at sort of supermarkets and stuff like that, a lot of it is to do with making it more attractive. A lot of it is to do with marketing. A lot of it is to do with trying to sell more. Is what it boils down to. So there's a kind of capitalist principle behind it to a certain extent, and you do long for, I guess, a real drive to try and get rid of that. You know, there are places where you can go and buy, and you take your own Tupperware, which obviously is, but you reuse it, and you buy by getting it put into the Tupperware, getting it weighed, and paying for it, which obviously would take longer, but would solve the problem. And it's a bit like, I think you have to do something fairly radical. If you look at what we did with plastic bags and started charging for plastic bags, that did greatly reduce that problem, obviously, because it was done economically. And 9 times out of 10, I'm afraid that's kind of what you have to do.
Yeah.
So you'd have to make it more expensive to buy in plastic, and make it cheaper to take along a Tupperware tub and to buy it and without having the packaging. That's essentially really what you have to do, I think.
Yeah. What do you think, everybody? Would you be happy to buy food and other items that don't come in plastic? I mean, bottles of bleach that aren't plastic, food that is wrapped in something other than plastic, something that's biodegradable. Would it feel as clean and as safe to you? I think consumer desires is part of this as well. Leslie says, I can't understand why plastic isn't recycled more. When you think about clothing, it could be turned into. It does make you wonder why it isn't. It's kind of the expense, I think, Leslie, as we've said. And also there's this infrastructure thing, because those kind of shops that you've talked about, Jeremy, that have refills and so on, refill stations, they are very few and far between. They're not hugely common. And they tend to be a bit more expensive. I think I've seen 1 or 2. Whereas if you had them at your local Sainsbury's and you could just go along with your container for your porridge oats and fill it up and have it weighed on the way out the door, I mean, it's far more likely to get used. Whereas, when you have to make a huge effort to go to a very specific shop that's the only one that does it, it's just not going to happen, is it? It's like anything else when you have a huge change, whether it's electric cars or something. If you've only got one charging point, no one's going to buy an electric car. So you either have to have huge amounts of more infrastructure, or, like you say, start penalising companies somehow, fining them, making them charge more to the customer, which then reduces the customer and their profits. Otherwise, it's just not going to kick in, is it? And there's nothing that we can do about it. Because when I'm sure our viewers have got issues when you get packages delivered to home and stuff, or you find things that got huge amounts of plastic on, or even paper packaging, and you do sit there and wonder what on earth any of it is for. And I think as far as our parents and grandparents are concerned, they kind of grew up in a time where they didn't have to deal with this, did they, Jeremy? Everything wasn't plastic when we were growing up. It was
glass and paper were obviously much more widely used. And I think, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there is a role for plastic in terms of keeping people safe in Africa, for example. There's a cleanliness issue for water and all sorts of medication, all that sort of thing. We're not saying that you've got to get rid of it altogether, because obviously that would be impractical. But increasing exponentially the use of it, as these statistics suggest from Greenpeace, is definitely categorically not the answer, because it all ends up in, as you've just said, either being burnt or in landfill, or even worse, in the oceans. They reckon there are going to be more pieces of plastic in the oceans, in the world's oceans, than fish soon. And it's even worse in the likes of the Indian subcontinent. There's a project called Flippy Floppy, which you've probably heard of, which deals with flip-flops. There are 3 billion flip-flops sold in the poorer countries of the world every year, and billions and billions and billions of them end up in the oceans and washed up on beaches. So it's not. I mean, it's not just about packaging, although obviously that's a key issue here. But it's about the use of plastic per se, really, and what it does to the seas. There's a guy who's an explorer who went down further than anyone had ever been before, and discovered plastic at the bottom of the ocean when he went. Miles and miles and miles underneath the sea. So I think that shows what it's doing in the proliferation of it.
Yeah, it was the bottom. I think it was the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the sort of the deepest part of the ocean, where you have to go down in incredible submersibles can withstand the pressure. And they still found plastic down there, and they found it in our guts as well. Leslie says, "Yet we import recycled cheap clothing made from plastic. Is it the expense or no motivation?" Probably, I think the one leads to the other, Leslie. But as with everything, it's probably about governments actually doing something. Maria says, "There's more plastic today. Go back to glass bottles for milk. The milkman was so popular." Especially with some ladies. Remember, we had coronet bottles from drink glass bottles, 10p to return them and get them washed out and reuse them. Those were the days, Maria. But also, the blue tits did very well in those days, as well as I recall. Quite often had my breakfast after the blue tit had already had the cream off the top. Anyway, as with everything, it comes down to the government taking some action. And that's what happened last night on the main story of the day. So government ministers are on the airwaves today, trumpeting their victory for the nation's health by ending the pollution of smoke and with a new ban on selling cigarettes ever to anybody born after January the 1st, 2009. Now, Jeremy, presumably, because this policy has widespread public support, every Tory, I'm sure, who is full square behind it and are seeing this as a very welcome potential electoral win, aren't they?
If only that were the case. I do find it extraordinary, as we were discussing earlier, but the arguments against this notional argument that it's somehow reducing people's freedoms when you're talking about 15-year-olds and under. I've got to say, I'm personally very much in favour of it. I think it's a radical move, but it requires a radical move because of the billions of pounds per year that it costs the NHS to deal with and treat people who are suffering from illnesses which are connected to smoking and to cancer. And obviously, the younger you become addicted, the more likely it is that you're going to smoke for the rest of your days and create that burden for the NHS. Exactly. So I personally really am completely baffled by the rebellion. I heard, various Tories lining up to talk about the imposition of this, talk about how it's going to be difficult for the law enforcement to stop them selling to people under 15. But I mean, you could say that about so many different aspects of legislation which are in place today. For example, the sale of booze to kids. Are we saying that that's wrong? I don't think that we are, really, are we? I think the means to that end, saying that it's going to be difficult to enforce is different to saying it's wrong. That's my view. That's my view, anyway.
Yeah, and it seem to be that there are lots of things that we say there's an age limit to something, or that you could do it up to this point and you can't do it. I mean, we used to have cocaine was legal, and then there came a point where it became illegal. I'm sure there were people at the time saying, "You've taken away my freedom of choice. The cocaine is perfectly good for you. It's a nice health drug," and it is now accepted that it's illicit, and that is part of the attraction for some people. But it also doesn't make it enforceable. But they go after the big importers of it rather than the users quite so much. And what do you think, everybody? Are you okay with this smoking ban and how it's being operated? Because all the polling is showing that the public are well supportive of this. It's a very popular policy with Conservative voters as well as Labour. Do let us know if you agree with it or not. Have you got a problem with it? Do you think it is unfair in taking away freedom of choice? I can't remember his name now. Chief, what is it? Chris Whitty. That's it. I knew it was Chris Whitty, but all I can think of is the pub quiz name they had for him in Downing Street, Quiz Whitty. He has said, look, once you become addicted to nicotine, your choice is gone. You don't have any freedom of choice anymore. You've smoked the first cigarette. They are designed to be addictive. And as I think it is, Martin Baggott, our health editor, says in the paper today, these are designed, if they are used as intended by their producers, they will kill 2/3 of everybody who uses them over a lifetime. That's what they are for. So that's their function and their purpose, as well as making money for people. So it does seem like there isn't an awful lot of choice to be taken away, really. And of course, anyone who can smoke now, anyone out there who smokes, you can carry on puffing. It's not affecting your freedom of choice at all. Now, we do have a small bit of footage about how the vote actually was announced in Parliament last night. Here it is. Oh, sorry. There we go. So there were 383 people who voted in Parliament who voted for this ban. Only 67 voted against. 57 of those 67 51 were conservatives. They were rebelling against their own government on a very popular policy because they felt that it was taking away personal freedoms. And so what we've got really, Jeremy, isn't it? It's a government policy that's been made possible by Labour. And what we've seen overnight and on the airwaves, it was 57, not 51. What we've seen on the airwaves is Wes Streeting, the shadow health secretary, getting far more attention for his position on this than Victoria Atkins, the actual health secretary. What do you think this sort of tells us about the general state of the government at the moment? Because everyone's just looking at Labour as though they're already in power in a way.
To a certain, I think that's true. I mean, I don't know. Also, are certain individuals using it as a platform to have a pop yet again at Rishi Sunak? Because it's kind of all the usual suspects who are talking about it being a bad idea. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss. I don't know. I'm disappointed by more than anything else, really. And I agree with you that actually Wes Streeting was, I just thought, eminently sensible when he was talking about it in Parliament, and slightly baffled by the opposition, as we discussed earlier, to it. This, as I say, this notion that it somehow limits freedoms for kids who are under 15 to buy cigarettes. I mean, really, is that the argument? That's not if that's not it's been stated as it's unconservative. I mean, what on earth is that about? I'm just baffled by that argument. I do not understand that argument.
I mean, trying to get myself in Liz Truss's head. If I could crowbar my way in there past all the me, it would be that it's not really a conservative thing, I think, because conservatives, by their nature, they want to keep things the same as they've always been. So in one sense, I suppose they don't want to change the status quo. But also, to conserve means to just keep things ticking over. It means keep people alive. It would seem to be quite sensible, and it is a conservative policy because it's been introduced by a conservative prime minister, and it becomes part of the record of a conservative government. But I think what she's talking about more here is libertarian politics, isn't it? Is this kind of American neocon, as Liz Trussites call it now, popcons in this country, the kind of extreme right-wing view of things, which is that personal freedom matters more than being right or being good or being kind or being polite to other people and their feelings. It's about my personal freedom to say what I like and do what I like, regardless of who's hurt by it, and that matters more, which I suppose says more about where the Conservative Party is going than about this policy particularly. Joanna says it's ridiculous. You could live in a house with 3 people. You could be able to smoke and one isn't. What about vapes? So many children use them. It's not thought out enough, I'm afraid. Tackle the crime rate and immigration first. Crime rate and immigration to one side, it is very hard to enforce this, isn't it, Jeremy? Because we already have counterfeit cigarettes. We have, as Joanna said, children buying vapes illegally who shouldn't be doing it. Although it becomes something which is accepted as a wrong, like driving before you're 17 or having sex before you're 16, it is hard for them to enforce, isn't it? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, aren't we talking essentially about shopkeepers not selling them to kids under the age of 15?
Yeah.
Well, I don't see why is that going to be difficult to enforce?
Because I think at the moment, the enforcement, when you have at the moment with vaping, as we've done in the Mirror quite a few times with investigations and stuff, is that there isn't enough it's the trading standards officers who have to go around and enforce it. And there's only 3. And they don't have the time or the resources. And the fines for the shops, it don't seem to be enough to stop them doing it. It's not a disincentive.
I mean, you're relying upon the honesty of shops. I accept that entirely in terms of you're relying upon the shopkeeper to not break the law. So yeah, to that extent, I suppose, who's going to check that? Who's going to verify that? You like many of those laws, like I said earlier, a bit like the sale of alcohol to kids under the age of 15. It's like a landlord not selling booze to kids who are underage when they come into the pub. Or, there are so many facets of laws of that nature which rely upon not the police, not trading standards, but the common sense of shopkeepers and bar owners and people who are kind of on the front line, in inverted commas, in terms of, the sale of these items to enforce it. But again, I go back to the original point. That doesn't make it wrong. That doesn't make the actual principle wrong. Trying to stop young kids from becoming addicted to nicotine that's got nothing. Well, in my view, anyway, nothing to do with libertarian views. In the sense that if you were talking about 18-year-olds or 21-year-olds, possibly there's an argument there, but not with kids who are under the age of 15. I just don't think it holds tight in on any level. And talking about the enforcement of it, yeah, okay, so it's going to be difficult for shopkeepers potentially to judge how old a kid is. So you just say, right, how old are you? If you're not sure about the age of somebody who's buying tobacco, ask them how old they are. Have they got proof of age, as you would do selling alcohol, as you would do, as I've just said, in a bar? How old are you? Give proof of your age. If you're not sure if the kid looks like he's 15 or under, you don't sell it. Yeah. What's difficult about that? I don't understand. Why is that a major issue in terms of this legislation? In my view, it's a what you were saying earlier. The vast majority of the people I think who've opposed it are doing it for political reasons. They're doing it as an opportunity to have a pop with Rishi Sunak. That's my view anyway.
Angela says it should be down to education from an early age. And arguably, if you have a ban like this, people do become more educated about the health effects of nicotine cigarettes. Stuart says, in principle, I'm in favour of the ban, the overall good it will do to society, but it needs to be extended to vapes. Thank you, Stuart. Yes. My concern in this instance is where will it end, as it could be seen as further deterioration of personal freedom and civil liberties. If you have a ban on people who are 15 now buying cigarettes, but when they get to the right age, they're going to be able to buy vapes, they're still going to be hooked on nicotine. Nicotine, even without the cigarette stuff around it, it's better for you, but it's still really bad. It can still kill you. It's still a pesticide. And unless you ban all nicotine to people from that age, it's going to continue to be a problem, isn't it? That there's still going to be health impacts that we've seen already from vaping. That is going to be a potential time bomb for the future. Do you think a future government might just iron that out and, I suppose, make it a level playing field?
I agree completely, actually, with the previous contributor. I think it would be sensible to do that. And I think I've been in bought vapes and there weren't any checks on them. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that as in so many aspects of public life, actually does require more investment in terms of enforcement, without a shadow of a doubt, and more powers to local councils and local authorities who are doing things like the trading standards, and the enforcement of those laws. There's no doubt whatsoever that when you take away from local authorities and take away from their budgets, they're the type of things that are cut. There's no doubt about that at all. But I think there is that overriding principle which is worth having. And if they bring it in for vapes as well, I think the vast majority of people would welcome that.
Yeah, Angela wants to know how enforcing it will work. I think to some extent, like anything, you want to enforce the age of consent. There's going to be people that ignore it, but generally speaking, it does actually sort of stick for an awful lot of people. Same with speeding as well. Maybe that's a better example. All right, on wearing of seatbelts, difficult to enforce. Everybody knows that it's wrong. But most people do it, and people are sort of generally a bit better for it if they try and stick to the speed limit, for example. But is there a law, Jeremy? Can you think of a single law which hasn't taken away personal freedoms of some sort, whether it's speeding, whether it's seatbelts, whether it's, I don't know, the right to seek asylum in the UK, whether it's the right to protest? Lots of things which Conservative government have voted for enthusiastically, which take away people's personal freedoms. Doesn't every bit of legislation take away your freedom to be?
That's the point. That is precisely the point I was making earlier. That's exactly the point I was making earlier. That is effectively what a law does. How one executes it, how you put it into place, the actual requirements, if you like, in terms of the nuts and bolts of it. Of course, like we've just said, like so many laws that one can think of. Not selling booze to under 18s, etc., etc. The analogies are there. They do rely not on the police and not on anything other than actually kind of a common sense approach to the people who are actually going to be doing that. So in this case, it's going to be shopkeepers, it's going to be supermarkets, it's going to be people who are selling tobacco who've got to make a judgment on how old the person is who's buying them. I personally don't see any problem. That hasn't been, as you just rightly said, that hasn't been ironed out and dealt with in previous laws. In a nutshell, that would be my argument for it.
Yeah, exactly. It does seem to be really, when you consider that perhaps a lot of what the objections that we're hearing have been about sort of this increasingly, whatever you want to call it, neocon, popcon, libertarian wing of the Conservative Party wanting to establish itself and sort of set out its stall a bit as to what it stands for, which of course is lunacy. JC says, I've been smoking since I was 10. Let idiots be idiots. The world does not want your betterment. JC, that's entirely...
JC and the Sunshine Band.
JC and the Sunshine Band. If you want to do that, obviously, you've been breaking the law. Whoever's been selling you the cigarettes or giving them to you has been breaking the law. But yeah, you had a personal choice. But chances are you've got 2 and 3 chances it's going to cark you pretty early, mate, compared to everybody else, and you're going to cost more to the NHS than you provide in taxes. So, especially as you were doing it since you were 10, mate. We do have to there's one other thing before we move on to good news, Jeremy, which is, when they had a similar bill like this introduced in New Zealand, it was overturned really quickly because it was introduced just before the Prime Minister resigned, Jacinda Ardern, and it didn't really have time to bed in. And the new government immediately went, nope, and threw it back out. Do you think that this is the chance that it's going to be overturned ever in this country, do you think?
Let's hope that, it's a Labour government that comes in and they put in force as Mr. Streeton said he would. Again, that would be my view of it. Whether a future Tory administration chose to then overturn it, I guess, is a risk, as it might be with other legislation of this nature. But it still had a pretty big majority, I think. And although they relied upon Labour to a certain extent, I would like to think that would not be the case and that wouldn't happen for ideological reasons. But who knows?
Well, it's going to be politically difficult, you'd have thought, as well. In New Zealand, they could overturn it because it was only like a bit of legislation that was, I think it was a few months old. Whereas if there's a change of government this year, which is expected in the polls, then, there'll be at least 5 years before there could be a government in place that might want to rescind it. And by that point, it'd put it in and it'd be quite well established, and we'd see how well it was working as well. I suspect it would be more difficult to overturn in the long run. Right. Thank you very much, everyone, for your help there. Best of luck with the cough, JC. We have found some good news in the world for you, and here it is. Now, we are headed for a wonderful summer of sport with the Olympics and the Paralympics being held in Paris this year. So unlike last time, no one's got to stay up to the middle of the night to watch it. But the River Seine seems to have the same problems as the River Thames, with rather a lot of pollution. And it is this river in which some of our athletes are going to be swimming for gold. So Team GB has come up with a cunning plan. They're going to be taking a lot of probiotics to promote gut health, which they hope will keep them free of the effects of E. coli, which we saw, for example, recently take out a crew in the Oxford-Cambridge boat race. They all collapsed at the end because they were so busy vomiting. Jeremy, is this proof that perhaps having had first-hand experience of Britain's sewage-filled rivers, it might somehow be an advantage when it comes to getting a gold medal?
Goodness me.
Sorry, we were scraping around for good news.
I think the Olympics, generally speaking, is a very positive story. I was up there interviewing Duncan Scott yesterday. As you know, he won 4 gold medals in Tokyo. 4 medals in Tokyo, I should say. 1 gold medal, 3 silvers. The first ever to do that. To win 4 gold medals in a single games, first Britain ever to do that. Tremendously exciting to meet the swimmers, talk about the prospects for Paris. And obviously amongst them will be swimmers who will be swimming in the Seine. The probiotics thing, I think you can only say that it's kind of, in inverted commas, a good idea when one takes into account what they're saying in Paris at the moment, which is that they really are trying to clean up the Seine. They have got a long-term plan in place. And the reason that they're going to have these events is obviously there are 2 aspects to it. One is long-term, they want to clean up the river so that people can go into it afterwards. And also for the spectacle, i.e. there'll be hundreds of thousands of people who can see that without having a ticket and can actually feel like they're participating in terms of spectating in the games and seeing it and watching it happen. I think the probiotics thing is an unusual approach. It is a good idea, and it's a shame that you've got to do that to combat the pollution. And I can only hope that it works and that they aren't sick like the rowers were on the Thames. I sincerely hope that it's a lot cleaner than the Thames and that does happen. the science behind it, I guess, if you keep on using them over a long period of time, maybe it does help build up some sort of resistance. I don't know, but that's certainly what the coaches for the marathon swimmers were saying.
Yeah, well, maybe at some point we'll see, Olympic swimmers sponsored by Imodium. But at the moment, they're going with Yakult, which is hopefully something that will get past the drug sensors. So good luck, lads. I hope it all works for you. Maybe if the Seine can get cleaned up, there is some hope eventually that maybe the River Thames and the other rivers in our country, which are dying, will have the same kind of treatment. Thank you.
Well, you go back to the plastics thing, don't you? You go back to the source of pollution. You go back to the with the rivers. There's no doubt whatsoever. It's the water companies that haven't been given. How can one put this?
The incentive,
enough incentive to change, yeah. But that's the bottom line. Their priorities is paying profits to shareholders rather than cleaning the rivers, and as a result of that, Fergal Sharkey's highlighted the issue, hasn't he? Brilliantly, I think. You get these fines for flagrant abuse of the legislation which is in place, and then tragically, it's the people who are using the rivers and obviously the wildlife and the nature of this country which is suffering as a result.
Exactly, but that's the theme of today's show, really, isn't it? Pollution, and the fact that there are some people who are determined to still hurt themselves, but because there's personal freedom, whether it's plastic, whether it's smoking, whether it's dumping sewage in the river and letting profits run wild without fining people. It's all about the freedom to do this, that, and the other. It's nothing about the cost that you pay if you don't do it properly and sensibly to start with. Angela says, I wouldn't go in the sea if you paid me because of the fish, I think she's saying. Or if she's saying if I paid her fish. The sea is a bit interesting at the moment, isn't it? I'm sure that will hopefully improve in years to come, as will plastic, as will smoking, because by the time you get to the point, Jeremy, where you have to sort of differentiate in the age between a 40-year-old and a 41-year-old who are trying to buy cigarettes, everyone will have stopped smoking. We'll just be ingesting huge amounts of plastic recycling fumes and stuff out of incinerators instead. We'll be getting off on that. That's something to look forward to, isn't it? Right. Thank you very much for helping us out with that today. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We will see you again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. Until then, we will see you on the other side of the weekend. Tatty bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks.